The wind howled across the wide Montana plains, carrying snow that fell so thick it was hard to see even a few steps ahead. The world seemed frozen in silence except for the sharp sound of the wind hitting against wooden fences and the creak of an old barn door swinging loose. It was the kind of storm that kept everyone indoors, the kind that could turn dangerous in a matter of minutes. But Luke Harrington was not a man who stayed inside easily. Luke lived alone on his large ranch, a stretch of land surrounded by hills and tall pine trees. His ranch was miles away from the nearest town, and his nearest neighbor was Henry Dawson, a man whose troubles were well known in the area. Luke had grown used to the quiet life, the sound of his horses, the smell of hay, and the endless view of snow and sky. He had been through many winters, but this one felt colder than most. That evening, as the storm grew worse, Luke noticed that his horses were restless. They paced in their stalls, ears twitching at every sound. He threw on his heavy coat, pulled his hat down low, and stepped out into the blizzard to check the fences. Snow hit his face like sharp needles, and the wind nearly pushed him back. He moved slowly through the storm, holding a lantern high as he made his way toward the north pasture. Everything looked normal until he saw faint footprints near the fence. Small, light steps that didn't belong to any of his ranch hands. They were fresh too, already half covered by falling snow. Luke frowned. No one should be out in weather like this. His first thought was maybe Henry had been wandering again, though it seemed unlikely. Curious and uneasy, he followed the prints. They led away from his ranch, down the narrow trail that curved toward Henry Dawson's property. Luke's mind wandered as he trudged through the snow. Henry had mentioned something strange a few months back at the feed store, that he had sent for a bride through an agency. The men in town had laughed, thinking it was another one of Henry's wild stories. But Luke remembered the serious tone in Henry's voice. The footprints grew fainter as the wind blew harder. Luke pulled his coat tighter and pressed on, the snow nearly reaching his knees. His lantern flickered, and for a moment everything went dark. He stood still, listening, and that's when he heard it. A soft, distant sound like someone calling out weakly through the storm. Luke's heart kicked up. He turned toward the sound and began walking faster. The voice came again, faint, broken, and desperate. Help. He followed the sound until his light caught something half buried in the snow, a figure small and still. Dropping to his knees, Luke brushed away the snow and saw the pale face of a young woman. Her eyes were closed, her lips blue, and she was barely breathing. Without thinking, Luke scooped her up in his arms. She was light as a child, her clothes soaked through and frozen stiff. He could feel the tremor of her heartbeat against his chest, weak but still there. The wind roared around them as he turned back toward his ranch, moving as fast as his legs could carry him. By the time he reached the porch, his beard and hat were white with frost. He kicked the door open, carried her inside, and laid her gently on the couch near the fire. The warmth of the flames filled the room, but her skin was still icy to the touch. Luke worked quickly, placing extra logs on the fire until it burned bright. He brought blankets from his room, wrapping her tightly, then heated water on the stove. Her breathing was shallow but steady. He removed her wet gloves and shoes carefully, rubbing her hands between his own to bring the color back. When she stirred, Luke leaned closer. "You're safe now," he said softly. "You're at my ranch." The woman's eyes fluttered open. They were a deep gray, cloudy with confusion. Where am I?" "You were out in the storm," Luke replied gently. "You almost didn't make it." Tears filled her eyes, but she said nothing for a moment. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. I was trying to reach the road. The man I came to marry left me at the cabin. There was no food, no firewood. I thought maybe someone would find me." Luke's chest tightened. He didn't have to ask who she meant. It could only be Henry Dawson. "You're Henry's bride?" he asked quietly. She nodded weakly. "He told me to stay at the cabin until he came back. But he never did." Luke sat back in silence, anger and disbelief mixing inside him. He had known Henry to be careless, but this was something else entirely. Leaving a woman alone in the middle of nowhere in weather like this, it was heartless. "What's your name?" Luke asked after a moment. "Clara," she whispered. "Clara Evans." He repeated the name slowly, as if to make sure she'd remember it too. "I'm Luke Harrington." Clara tried to sit up, but she was too weak. Luke stopped her gently. "Don't move too much yet. You need to rest." She looked around the room. The warm fire, the wooden walls lined with books and tools, the kettle steaming softly on the stove. "This place, it feels safe," she said quietly. Luke gave a small smile. "It is. You can stay here until you're strong again. You don't need to worry about anything tonight." Outside, the wind continued to scream, shaking the windows and rattling the roof. But inside the ranch house, time seemed to slow. Clara lay wrapped in blankets, her eyes half closed, the color slowly returning to her cheeks. Luke sat nearby, watching to make sure she didn't fall asleep too deeply. As he sat there, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of life had led her here. A stranger from another land, abandoned in a frozen wilderness. He thought about the promise she must have believed in, the dream of a new life that had turned into a nightmare. When she finally drifted into sleep, Luke stood and walked to the window. The snow still fell thick and heavy, but the storm was beginning to calm. The thought crossed his mind that if he had taken a different route that evening, if he had ignored those footprints, she would be gone now, lost to the storm. The realization sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the cold. He turned back to the fire, threw another log in and sat down again, resting his arms on his knees. He had lived alone for years, his heart guarded and his world quiet. But tonight something had changed. There was a stranger sleeping under his roof, someone who had been left behind, just like he once had been after losing his parents so young. Luke didn't know what the next days would bring, but one thing was clear. Fate had brought Clara to his door for a reason. He looked at her one more time, the soft light of the fire glowing on her face. Then he whispered almost to himself, "You're safe now, Miss Evans, I promise you that." Outside, the storm began to fade. The world that had been white and wild just hours ago was slowly falling silent again. In that silence, two lives that had been lost in their own storms, one of loneliness, the other of fear, had quietly found each other in the heart of a Montana winter. And though Luke didn't yet know it, that single act of kindness would change both their lives forever. Morning light slowly filled the room, soft and golden as it touched the walls of Luke Harrington's ranch house. The storm had passed during the night, leaving a deep silence behind. Snow covered everything outside, turning the land into a white ocean. Inside, the fire had burned low, but its warmth still lingered. Luke sat quietly in a chair, his hat resting on the table beside him, watching the woman he had rescued. Clara Evans was awake now. She sat up slowly, still wrapped in the thick blanket Luke had given her. Her face looked pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she tried to hold the cup of warm tea he had made. "You should drink it slowly," Luke said, his voice calm and steady. "It'll help warm you up." Clara nodded and took a small sip. For a while she said nothing, only looking around the room. The place was simple but clean. A sturdy wooden table, shelves filled with books, a few old pictures hanging on the walls. It felt like a home, a place built by someone who had worked hard for everything he owned. After a few minutes, Luke spoke again. "You said last night that Henry left you at the cabin?" Clara's eyes lowered. "Yes," she said softly. "He was angry when he saw me. I don't think I was what he expected." Luke leaned back slightly. "Expected?" Clara looked into the fire as if searching for words. "I came from England. My father passed away 2 years ago, and after that there was nothing left for me. A friend told me about an agency that helped women find husbands in America, men who were looking for companionship and needed help on their farms or ranches. It sounded like a way to start over, a way to belong somewhere again." Luke listened silently. He could hear the sadness beneath her calm tone. "When Henry wrote to me," Clara continued, "he seemed kind at first. His letters spoke of a quiet life, hard work, and peace. I thought that was what I wanted. So I sold everything I had for the journey. When I arrived, he came to meet me at the small train station near town. But the moment he saw me, something changed. He looked disappointed. He said I wasn't what he imagined. He hardly spoke on the way to the cabin. Her voice broke slightly, but she kept talking as if she needed to let it out. He told me to wait there while he went to town for supplies. That was 3 days ago. He never came back. I tried to keep the fire going, but I ran out of wood. Then the storm came." She took another sip of tea, her eyes glistening. "I thought I would die there." Luke's jaw tightened. He didn't say what he thought, but the anger inside him was clear. No one deserved to be treated that way, not even a stranger. "You're safe now," he said finally. "You can stay here as long as you need. There's food, warmth, and no one will bother you." Clara looked up at him, her eyes full of quiet gratitude. You don't even know me, and yet you helped me. Why? Luke gave a small smile. Because you needed help. That's reason enough. His simple answer made her eyes soften. For a long time, she had believed kindness was something people only wrote about in books. Yet here it was, real, quiet, and unexpected. Days passed, and the snow outside remained thick. The storm had closed all the roads, and the world seemed to shrink to just the small ranch and the endless whiteness beyond. During that time, Luke and Clara slowly began to talk more. He showed her how to feed the horses, how to warm water on the stove, and how to keep the fire steady through the night. Clara watched him work and was amazed by how much he knew. He moved with calm confidence, a man who had learned everything through patience and experience. In the evenings, they often sat near the fire. Luke would read from one of his books, old Western stories or travel journals, while Clara listened quietly, sometimes smiling at his deep, steady voice. It had been a long time since Luke had shared his evenings with anyone. He didn't realize how much he had missed simple conversation, laughter, and the sound of another person moving around his home. One afternoon, while she helped him prepare supper, Clara said softly, "You live here all alone?" Luke nodded. "I used to have family. My parents passed when I was young. The ranch was all I had left, so I built it up piece by piece. It keeps me busy. You must get lonely sometimes," she said. He gave a small shrug. "Sometimes. But I've learned to live with quiet." Clara looked down at the table, her hands folding neatly in her lap. "Quiet can be peaceful," she said, "but it can also make a person feel invisible." Her words lingered in the air. Luke didn't reply, but her honesty struck something deep inside him. The days grew longer and Clara's strength returned. Her cheeks gained color again and her voice grew steadier. She even began to smile more often. She would hum softly while washing dishes or brushing the horses, her soft singing filling the silence that once felt heavy. Luke found himself watching her sometimes, not out of curiosity but from quiet admiration. She had been through so much, yet there was still light in her spirit. One evening, as the snow fell gently outside, Clara said, "I still don't know what I'll do when spring comes." Luke looked at her. "You'll have time to decide. You don't need to rush." "I can't stay here forever," she said with a small laugh, though her tone carried sadness. "You've done enough for me. I should find work or maybe contact the agency again." Luke nodded slowly. "We'll figure it out. But for now, you just focus on getting better." She smiled faintly. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple," he replied quietly. "Sometimes life is hard because we make it that way." The next morning, Clara found a small bouquet of wildflowers on the kitchen table, tiny blue blossoms that somehow survived under the snow. She knew at once who had picked them. She didn't say anything, but her heart warmed in a way it hadn't in years. As the days passed, their bond deepened, though neither of them said much about it. There were small moments, a shared meal, a quiet smile, the way their hands brushed when passing a cup of tea. That spoke louder than words. Clara began to laugh again, something she hadn't done since she arrived in America. She laughed at Luke's quiet jokes, at the clumsy way one of the ranch dogs tried to steal bread from the table, and even at her own attempts to ride one of the gentler horses. Luke found himself laughing too, something he hadn't done in a long time either. The house that once echoed only with the sound of the wind and his boots now felt alive again. But despite the peace, Clara still carried the weight of her past. Some nights Luke could hear her softly crying in the guest room, though she tried to hide it. He never asked her about it, respecting her silence. Instead, he made sure there was always a fire burning, and a warm meal waiting in the morning. As winter slowly began to loosen its hold, the snow outside started to melt, revealing patches of brown earth and green grass beneath. The days grew brighter, and Clara often stood by the window, watching the sunlight spread across the hills. She felt safe, maybe for the first time in her life. But she also knew safety was not the same as belonging. She didn't yet know where she was meant to go next. One night she thanked Luke again for saving her. "If you hadn't found me that night," she said softly, "I wouldn't be here now." Luke looked into the fire and replied simply, "Anyone would have done the same." But deep down, Clara knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would have gone out into a storm. Not everyone would have cared enough to search, and Luke knew it too, though he didn't say it. There was something about Clara's quiet courage, Her kindness, despite everything she had suffered, that stirred something inside him he hadn't felt in years, something gentle and real. Outside, the snow melted little by little, and with each passing day, it felt like both of them were thawing too. Two lonely hearts slowly finding warmth again after a long, cold season. The winter began to fade slowly, as if it too was tired of the cold. The snow that once covered the land started melting under the gentle warmth of spring sunlight. Water trickled down the hills, forming small streams that shimmered in the light. The sky, once gray and heavy, turned blue again. On Luke Harrington's ranch, life was returning, both outside and inside. Clara Evans had been living there for several weeks now. She had grown stronger each day, her cheeks bright with color, her laughter soft but steady. The woman who had once been lost and frightened in a blizzard was now learning how to live again. Luke had watched this change quietly, never saying much but feeling it deeply. Their days fell into a gentle rhythm. Mornings began early, with the golden light spilling through the windows. Luke would already be up, preparing feed for the horses or checking the fences. Clara often joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders and stepping out into the crisp air. At first, Luke had tried to stop her from working, insisting she should rest. But Clara wouldn't hear of it. "You saved my life," she told him one morning with a smile. "Let me at least help a little." So she began helping with simple chores and feeding the chickens, brushing the horses, sweeping the porch. She worked with quiet energy, humming softly as she moved. Sometimes Luke would pause to watch her from a distance. There was something calming about her presence, something that made the ranch feel less lonely. In the evenings, they often sat together near the fireplace. Luke would read out loud from one of his old books while Clara mended small things around the house. A torn shirt, a loose button, a worn-out saddle strap. Her needle moved with care, and she listened to Luke's deep voice as if every word painted a picture. One night, after he finished reading, Clara looked up and said softly, "You have a way with words. When you read, it feels like I can see the story happening." Luke smiled a little. "My mother used to read to me when I was young. I guess I learned from her." There was a short silence. Clara smiled too, a touch of sadness in her eyes. "My mother used to sing to me," she said quietly. "Even when we had nothing, she'd sing and make it feel like everything was going to be all right." Luke looked into the fire. "She must have been a good woman." "She was," Clara said, her voice warm but distant. "She used to say that every storm passes eventually. I didn't believe her at first, but now I think she was right." Luke glanced at her, and their eyes met for a moment, long enough for both of them to understand that the storm wasn't just about the weather. As days passed, the bond between them deepened in ways neither of them spoke about. It wasn't sudden or loud, and it was quiet, steady, like spring snow melting into the river. Luke, who had lived in silence for years, found comfort in her company. Clara, who had once been abandoned, found peace in his kindness. They shared small things, laughter, stories, and moments of calm. One afternoon, while Luke worked on fixing a fence, Clara brought him lunch. She sat on the fence rail, handing him a sandwich wrapped in cloth. "You work too hard," she said playfully. Luke smiled, taking the food. "And you talk too much for someone who once said she was shy." Clara laughed, shaking her head. "I only talk when I'm comfortable." Her words made Luke pause for a moment. He didn't say it out loud, but hearing that made something warm settle inside him. That evening, Clara decided to bake bread, something she hadn't done in a long time. The smell filled the house, soft and comforting. Luke came in from the barn, following the scent like a hungry boy. "Smells good," he said, taking off his gloves. Clara laughed lightly. "Don't get too excited. It might not be as good as it smells." When the bread was ready, they sat at the table together, sharing it with honey and tea. The simple meal felt like a feast after a long winter. Luke looked across the table, watching Clara smile as she took her first bite. The way she lit up the room without even trying reminded him how much life had been missing from his world before she arrived. One night, while the rain tapped softly on the roof, Clara asked a question that surprised him. "Luke, do you ever think about leaving this place? Traveling, seeing other parts of the world?" Luke looked thoughtful for a moment. "I used to. When I was younger, I dreamed of going everywhere, to the ocean, to the cities, to the deserts down south. But after a while, I realized this land is part of me. Every stone, every fence, every sunrise. It's home," Clara smiled. "Home. I used to think that word meant a house or a town. But I think it's more about the feeling you get, being where you belong. Luke looked at her then, a quiet understanding passing between them. As spring grew stronger, they began repairing the old barn together. The roof had taken damage from the snow and Luke needed an extra pair of hands. Clara insisted on helping, though Luke worried she might tire easily. But she surprised him with her determination. She wasn't afraid of hard work. One morning as they worked side by side, she said, "You've built all of this yourself?" Luke nodded. "Every post, every wall. Took me years." She looked around the wide field stretching under the blue sky. "It's beautiful. You've built something worth more than money." Luke gave a small smile. "I guess it's all I ever wanted. Something solid, something that lasts." Clara turned to him, her eyes warm. "And now you're helping me build something too." He raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" She smiled softly. "My life again." Her words caught him off guard, but he didn't reply right away. Instead, he nodded slightly, his chest tightening in a way he couldn't explain. That night, Luke found himself standing outside long after sunset, looking up at the stars. The world felt peaceful, but there was something new stirring inside him, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in years. Clara had brought light into his quiet world, and he didn't know what to do with it. He told himself it was simply kindness, that he cared because she needed someone. But deep down he knew it was more than that. He admired her courage, her gentle strength, and the way she looked at life with hope despite everything she had lost. Inside the house, Clara was by the window, watching the moonlight touch the snow-covered peaks in the distance. When Luke came back in, she smiled faintly. "It's beautiful tonight," she said. He nodded. "Yes, it is." For a long time they stood there in silence, side by side, looking out at the night sky. The air between them was filled with something unspoken, something tender and real. As the days turned into weeks, their bond became impossible to ignore. Yet Luke kept his distance, reminding himself that she deserved freedom, not another man to depend on. He had promised to protect her, not claim her. Clara, too, felt the growing closeness but didn't dare speak of it. She knew she owed her life to him, but she didn't want pity. She wanted to be seen for who she was. Still, in her heart, she couldn't deny that her world now revolved around the quiet cowboy who had given her hope again. The spring sun warmed the land. Flowers bloomed near the fences and birds returned to the trees. On one bright afternoon, Luke and Clara stood near the pasture watching the horses run freely across the field. Clara sighed softly. "They look so happy." "They've been waiting all winter for this," Luke said. Clara turned to him with a gentle smile. "I suppose we've both been waiting too." Luke looked at her, and for a brief moment neither of them said another word. There was no need. The wind carried the unspoken truth between them, that somehow through the storm and silence, they had found something rare, something that neither of them had been looking for but both desperately needed: peace, friendship, and maybe the beginning of love. Spring had fully arrived on Luke Harrington's ranch. The snow had melted completely, leaving the fields green and alive with wildflowers. The horses grazed freely, the chickens pecked at the ground, and the barn doors swung open to reveal the work Luke and Clara had done together to repair the old structure. Life felt peaceful, almost perfect, and yet Luke knew that their quiet world could not remain untouched forever. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Luke was feeding the horses when a familiar figure appeared at the far edge of the property. His heart sank before he even recognized the man. It was Henry Dawson, the neighbor who had sent Clara to America under false promises. He looked tired, disheveled, and more desperate than ever, yet there was still the same arrogance in his stance. Henry called out, his voice carrying across the fields. "Luke Harrington, I need to speak to you." Luke didn't answer immediately. He kept his gaze on the horses, keeping his voice calm as he replied, "I'm listening." Henry stormed closer, his boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. "You've got no right to keep her here. She's mine. You have no idea what you're doing." Clara, who had been carrying water from the well, froze. Fear flickered across her face for a brief moment, but then she straightened, summoning the courage she had gained over the last few weeks. She knew Luke would protect her, and that knowledge gave her strength. Luke stepped in front of her. He was tall, steady, and unyielding. "She's not yours," he said firmly. "You left her alone in a cabin in a storm without food or warmth. You had no right to abandon her like that. She's free now. Henry's face turned red with anger. I changed my mind. I made a mistake. You can't just take her from me. Luke didn't flinch. She isn't property, Henry. You made your choice. Now you need to live with it. Clara stepped forward, her voice surprisingly clear. Mr. Dawson, I came here hoping to start a new life, not to be treated like an object. I trusted you, but you left me when I needed you the most. I am done waiting for you. Henry looked at her, disbelief and frustration written all over his face. He opened his mouth to say something, then hesitated. For a moment there was silence between them, broken only by the gentle breeze moving through the fields. Luke kept his eyes on Henry. He didn't need to threaten him. His calm confidence was enough. He had rescued Clara, protected her, and now he had the support of her words. Henry couldn't argue with the truth. Finally, Henry muttered something under his breath and turned away. He stormed off across the fields, kicking up dirt and grass, disappearing over the hill in frustration. Luke watched until he was gone. He knew Henry would not return, at least not with the same arrogance. The man had lost more than he realized, and Clara had gained her freedom. After Henry left, Clara sank onto a wooden bench near the barn. She buried her face in her hands and took a deep breath. I can't believe he actually came here, she said quietly. Luke sat beside her, not touching, not rushing, just offering his presence. You're safe now, he said. He can't hurt you anymore. Clara looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears, but not from fear. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and a deep sense of closure. Thank you, Luke, she whispered. I don't know how I can ever repay you. Luke shook his head. You don't need to. Just being safe, healthy, and free is enough. The next few days were calm, yet a sense of renewal filled the air. Clara no longer felt the shadow of fear hanging over her. She could walk freely on the land, speak her mind, and live without anxiety. The ranch, once quiet and lonely, was now filled with life, laughter, conversation, and the soft hum of daily work. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the agency that had arranged Clara's journey. She opened it with trembling hands. The letter officially canceled her contract with Henry Dawson, confirming her freedom to choose her own path. She read it aloud to Luke, her voice trembling with excitement and disbelief. I'm free, she said softly, smiling through her tears. Luke nodded. Yes, you are. Free to do whatever you want, wherever you want. Clara's heart swelled with gratitude. She had come to America with hope, only to face betrayal and abandonment. But through the storm, both literal and emotional, she had found someone who cared deeply for her well-being. Luke had shown her what true kindness looked like: patience, respect, and a steady strength that never wavered. Over the next few weeks, they worked together on the ranch, restoring more than just the physical buildings. Clara learned to ride horses with confidence, tending to the land, planting seeds for the garden, and caring for the animals. Every small task brought her a sense of accomplishment, a reminder that she could take control of her life. Luke watched her transformation with quiet admiration. He had always respected strong, capable people, but Clara's resilience touched something deep within him. He found himself looking for excuses to spend time near her, even if it was just to hand her a tool or watch her laugh while she worked. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Clara and Luke sat on the porch sharing a quiet meal. The air was filled with the scent of fresh bread and the distant aroma of flowers blooming in the garden. Clara looked at him and smiled. I never imagined life could feel like this. Safe, warm, and full of possibility. I thought I would always be lost. Luke reached across the table and offered a gentle nod. Sometimes life surprises us. It brings people together in ways we never expect, and it's not always easy, but it can be worth it. Clara's smile widened. I'm starting to understand that now. Thanks to you. Luke felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just pride in helping her survive the storm. It was the realization that their lives had become intertwined in ways he hadn't anticipated. He had always been cautious with his heart, used to solitude and silence. But Clara's presence was different. It was gentle, bright, and patient, something that made him feel alive again. As the days continued, they both grew more comfortable with the idea that this was more than a temporary arrangement. Clara no longer feared the world outside the ranch. Luke no longer feared opening his heart to another person. Their bond, built slowly through shared experiences, laughter, and quiet understanding, was becoming unbreakable. One afternoon, while working on the barn roof, Clara lost her footing for a moment. Luke, ever watchful, caught her hand before she could fall. Their eyes met, and for a brief second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Neither spoke, but both understood the unspoken truth. Their connection had grown stronger, built on trust, courage, and shared history. After that, Clara often stayed close while working outside. Not out of fear, but because being near Luke felt natural. They walked the fields together, tended the garden side by side, and shared long conversations under the wide Montana sky. Then, one quiet evening, Clara turned to Luke as they sat watching the sunset. "Luke, I'm not the same person who came here. I'm stronger now, and I think I finally understand what home really means." Luke looked at her, the fading light reflecting in his eyes. "Home isn't always a place," he said softly. "It's the people who make you feel safe, who help you grow, who care when the world seems cold. You found that here. And maybe so have I." Clara's smile was gentle, filled with quiet happiness. She reached out, taking his hand lightly as if to seal the understanding between them. "Then I suppose we've both found what we were looking for." Luke nodded, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. The storm, the fear, and the betrayal were all behind them now. Ahead lay a life of possibility, built on trust, care, and shared strength. And though neither of them said it out loud, both knew that their bond was no longer just about safety or gratitude. It was about something deeper: respect, admiration, and the first quiet stirrings of love. The world outside was waking up after the long winter. Birds sang from the trees, the wind carried the scent of flowers, and the land was alive with new growth. Inside the ranch, Clara and Luke sat together, hands lightly touching, hearts quietly connected. The past had been difficult, but together, they were building a future filled with hope. In that moment, with the sun setting over the hills, it was clear that life had given them both a second chance, not just to survive, but to thrive, to heal, and to open their hearts to something neither had expected, yet both had needed. Spring had fully arrived on Luke Harrington's ranch. The snow had melted completely, leaving green fields dotted with wildflowers that swayed gently in the warm breeze. The horses galloped freely across the pastures, the chickens clucked happily in the yard, and the garden Luke and Clara had planted together was beginning to bloom. Life on the ranch was vibrant and alive, reflecting the changes that had quietly taken place within both of them. Clara Evans had become a familiar part of the rhythm of the ranch. She woke with the sun, helping feed the animals, tending to the garden, and learning more about the land with each passing day. She had grown stronger and more confident, her laughter ringing through the house and fields. Where she had once been timid and uncertain, she now moved with a quiet assurance, knowing she had survived storms far harsher than any weather. Luke watched her from a distance sometimes, admiring the grace and strength she displayed. He no longer saw her as fragile or in need of protection. He saw her as a partner, someone who had endured hardship and come through it with courage. And yet he couldn't ignore the warmth that spread through him whenever she smiled or laughed. A warmth that had been absent from his life for far too long. One morning, Clara stood at the edge of the garden, brushing her hands on her apron and looking out across the fields. The sky was a brilliant blue, and the sun painted the hills in golden light. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I never imagined life could feel like this." Luke walked up beside her, carrying a bucket of feed for the horses. "It is," he agreed, glancing at the blooming flowers. "But it's even better when it's shared." Clara smiled faintly, remembering how lonely she had felt only months before. She had arrived in America full of hope, only to face betrayal and abandonment. Yet here she was, alive, safe, and finally finding a sense of belonging. Luke had given her something she hadn't realized she needed, a place to call home and someone she could trust completely. As the days passed, their bond grew stronger. They worked side by side in the garden, repaired fences together, and tended to the animals with quiet teamwork. The ranch, once a quiet and solitary place, now felt full of life and purpose. Even the simple act of sharing a meal or sitting together by the fire became meaningful, each moment carrying the weight of trust, respect, and shared history. One afternoon, Clara announced she wanted to start planting more flowers near the barn. Luke raised an eyebrow playfully. You want to make it look like a meadow now? Clara laughed. Why not? Life is too short not to make things beautiful. Luke chuckled, realizing how much her optimism had changed the ranch and his life. He reached for a trowel and joined her, their hands brushing occasionally as they worked. Each small touch carried an unspoken understanding, a silent acknowledgement that their lives were intertwined in a way neither had expected. Weeks passed, and with each day, the idea of parting began to feel impossible. Clara had initially thought she might leave the ranch to find work in town, to explore her own path now that she was free from Henry Dawson's shadow. But the longer she stayed, the more she realized that this place, and Luke's quiet presence, had become essential to her sense of safety and happiness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Clara stood on the porch gazing at the horizon. Luke joined her silently, standing beside her as the wind carried the scent of blooming flowers and fresh earth. I've been thinking, Clara said softly, her voice almost lost in the breeze. I thought I needed to leave to find my own way, but I don't want to leave. Not now. Not ever. Luke turned to look at her, his expression gentle but filled with emotion. You don't have to, he said simply. If you want to stay, then stay. This place, this ranch, it's yours too. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy, not sadness. You make it sound so simple, she said, smiling through her emotions. Luke shrugged slightly, though his own eyes softened. It doesn't need to be complicated. Life is better when it's shared. When someone cares for the same things, works toward the same goals, and stands by you when storms come. Clara reached out, taking his hand lightly in hers. You've stood by me when I needed it most, she said. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You don't need to, Luke replied, squeezing her hand gently. You've given me something just by staying. Your trust, your laughter, your courage, and that's worth more than anything. The sun disappeared behind the hills, leaving a soft twilight glow across the fields. They stood together quietly, hand in hand, both feeling the weight of the past and the promise of the future. The stormy days, the fear, and the loneliness were all behind them now. What lay ahead was bright, full of life, hope, and the possibility of love that had grown slowly but surely between them. The next morning, they walked through the fields together, tending to the animals and checking the fences. Luke noticed how comfortable Clara had become on horseback, guiding the horses with confidence and ease. She laughed freely, calling out to the animals, and for the first time in a long time, Luke felt completely at peace. Later, as they worked in the garden, Luke looked at her and said softly, I never expected this. To find someone who feels like home. Clara paused, wiping her hands on her apron. I never expected it either, she said quietly. I thought I was coming to a strange place with no one to rely on. But here I am, and here you are. They shared a quiet smile, the kind that speaks volumes without a single word. It was a smile of understanding, gratitude, and the unspoken promise of a shared future. As spring turned into early summer, the ranch flourished. Flowers bloomed, the garden produced vegetables and herbs, and the animals thrived under their care. Clara and Luke continued to work side by side, their days filled with purpose and shared joy. They had learned each other's habits, quirks, and strengths, and the rhythm of their lives together felt natural and comforting. One afternoon, as the sun warmed the land and a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh flowers, Clara turned to Luke. Do you ever think about the day I arrived? In the blizzard? Luke smiled faintly. I do. You were half frozen, and I thought I'd lost you already. I was glad I found you in time. Clara laughed softly, shaking her head. I thought I was done for. But you saved me. Not just from the storm, but from fear, loneliness, and hopelessness. You gave me a second chance at life. Luke reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. We saved each other, he said simply. Her eyes softened, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The world around them seemed quiet, as if giving them a moment to appreciate what they had found. Trust, companionship, and a love that had grown slowly, patiently, through hardship and care. As summer approached, they began planning small projects around the ranch together, building new fences, planting additional flowers, and improving the barn. Each task was a chance to share time, laughter, and teamwork, strengthening the bond between them. One evening, as the sun set in a cascade of orange and pink over the hills, Luke and Clara sat on the porch drinking tea and watching the world. Clara leaned her head on Luke's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I feel like I belong here," she whispered. Luke looked down at her, his heart full. "You do. You've always belonged here, Clara. You just needed to find your way." She smiled, resting against him, and for the first time, she truly felt at home, safe, valued, and loved. The world outside the ranch continued to bloom and grow just like their lives. Luke and Clara had survived storms, betrayal, and fear, but together, they had found something rare and precious, a home not just in a place, but in each other. And as the stars began to twinkle over the Montana hills that night, it was clear that this was only the beginning of a new life, a life full of hope, love, and endless possibilities. Two hearts once lost in separate storms had finally found their safe harbor in each other, under the wide open sky.